Hi guys and welcome back to the kingdom. I hope you guys have had positive and productive weeks this week. So this week we are talking about finding the right person to tell your story. And no, we are not talking about finding someone else to write it. If you're here, then I'm assuming you're the person that's writing it. No, we are talking about the narrator. The how and the who are the eyes, ears and mind of your story. And no, that doesn't necessarily have to be your main character. So let's do this. Okie dokie, so let's start off with the basics. When you are telling a story, there are three key people that you need to consider. The first is the narrator, or the person that is telling the story. The second is the protagonist, who is the person who is pursuing the goal of the book. And three, the principal point of view, who is the person through whom we experience the story. For example, a great point of reference on this is the Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. Most of us will have read these when we were younger. Now, if you guys remember, the story is actually narrated by a lesser character, and the story is told through his own research, his interviews with other characters, and his own experiences with the Beauregard children. He was the principal point of view and the narrator for the series, but he clearly wasn't a main character or central figure to the plot. So let's look at these roles in a little bit more detail, and let's start with the big one, the narrator, the person who is writing the story down. Now, in fiction, it is quite common nowadays for you to have a nameless, faceless narrator telling the story, which essentially comes back to it being the author themselves who is telling the story. As a result, most of these books will almost certainly be written in third person and spend a majority of the time following around the main character and describing their experiences and feelings and the points of the plot. This means that the narrator is separate from the principal point of view and the protagonist. For example, the Harry Potter series is a fantastic example of this nameless, faceless narrator. The book follows Harry around and talks about his feelings, his experiences. However, it is not written or told by Harry, which makes Harry the principal point of view and the protagonist, but not the narrator, because it is not his voice that is physically telling the story. Now, this method of storytelling is extremely popular at the moment, and I think personally it's down to a few key reasons. Firstly, it does allow you to switch point of views for a scene or a series of events throughout your novel far more easily and without as much jarring. You can show your reader key scenes or events that happen that your main character isn't aware of or doesn't know took place, and this can really help build up suspense in your novel. You can show them key conversations or key plot points that will later become relevant. It's also easier for people to sit down and start writing because they can write what they know, because the narrator is essentially the author, so you don't have to think about too much about what you know and where you know, because as the author, you know it all. So we can take a complex element of the storytelling out of the process and make it a little bit easier and more enjoyable. Another less popular method is to use your main character and have them tell the story, and often the story will be told in first person. Like my debut novel Undercover that's being released in November. Shameless plug, link to pre-order in the description below. So in this example, your narrator is your protagonist. Now, the beauty of this method, and I'll admit I'm biased because this is the one that I personally prefer to write in, I find the beauty of this method is that you can go into far more detail about the feelings and the emotional trauma and the emotional conflict for your main character as the events are happening. You can describe every thought, every feeling, and I think it's a lot easier for readers to really connect with a main character, really get involved with the story when it's done properly. You can show all of the internal monologues, all of the questions that are going on around their mind, and have the reader understand that level of depth and complexity with you because they're experiencing it with the character. It is almost kind of like the character is trying to justify all of the decisions that they're about to make, and the reader can understand why they've made those decisions. Personally, I like it more because you get to explore your main character more. Now, this method does have its drawbacks. The main one being it is extremely difficult to change point of view in your story without there being a physical signal at the beginning of your chapter. Which can be really frustrating when you know something far more interesting, far more appealing is happening somewhere else in the story, but you can't talk about it because your MC just isn't there. Now, of course, this can make for more interesting plot twists. However, I personally find that it ends up more often than not becoming a very complicated explanation session, which is another thing I try to avoid in my books, because if you've got to have pages and pages of explanation going on to explain why the events of your book are happening to your reader, then it's just not very good for flow. If I can see that a huge explanation session has to take place before some action or event or some information is revealed, I go back over my plot and try to earmark where I can put that explanation in somewhere else, so you don't have to have a massive info dump clogging up your book when this information comes to light. Also, because I write in first person, this is why I do such detailed plots, because when you can see these things coming, it's a lot easier to go back in the plotting stage and earmark where you need to put it in, rather than when you've already written the first draft. The final version, and the version I talked about in the Lemony Snicket series, it is far less popular, but it is choosing someone else to be the eyes and ears of the story, another character perhaps, or someone else who's heard about the story, someone doing research or whatever, and they're the person telling the story and they are the narrator. What's key about this method is that they are not the person pursuing the goal of the book. They are not the protagonist, they are not the main character. They could be a skeptic, they could be the best friend, they could be the grandchild that's telling the story of their grandfather who told them when they were a kid on their knee. Whatever it is, they're not the protagonist. Whatever you want their role to be, you just have to remember one thing. It is through them that we experience the story. They're the eyes, they're the ears, they're the voice. If they are present in the events of the story, then it's through them and their experiences that we're going to experience the book. So if your MC and his group of 3 friends, one of which is our principal point of view, is involved in a gunfight, it is not through the MC and their action-packed sequence of events that we're going to experience the story. It is through our principal point of view, one of the other guys, that we are going to experience the story. Say there's a gunfight where the MC is being a real badass. We don't experience it through the MC's point of view. We experience it through our principal point of view, who is probably hiding and watching the MC be a badass. Maybe the MC's best friend dies and we don't experience that grief because probably the principal point of view didn't know the best friend very well and as such has to watch the MC in grief but really doesn't feel that much at all. We see the story through their attempts to comfort the MC, not through the grief process itself. Now this is a fantastic way to tell a story. Lemony Snicket can tell you that because I loved those books growing up. Now it can also be a fantastic way to add extra emotional investment into the story, particularly if the principal point of view has a fantastic relationship with the MC. This method also allows for you to explore scenes that the MC might not necessarily be aware of or see or hear. Maybe they're a secondary character and they see something but they forget to tell the MC, or they're too late, or they betray the MC, or whatever's going on. Who knows? But it's a fantastic way to receive a story because it's a lot easier to connect with a person telling a story rather than an unidentifiable entity that you can't really place. The problem with this method again is that if that character isn't around for a series of events, or if they don't know about the series of events, then you can't really talk about it. And that is one of the reasons why Lemony Snicket's version is so brilliant, because he conducts interviews and he does research and he states it in his book really clearly that this is what that person did. Now, that's not always going to work for everybody. In fact, I can only think of a handful of times where that's even appropriate. But there are ways around it. You just have to think about it and experiment and find what works for you. When it comes to choosing which method to use in your story, my recommendation is to experiment. Whether you're a new writer or an experienced writer, if you're starting a new book, experiment and see what allows your readers to grip with the plot more. You may be an experienced first-person writer like myself, but I have books that are written in third person because that's the best way to tell the story. I haven't experimented with principal point of view writing yet, but it's on my list of things to do because it's a skill that I would love to be able to explore at some point. So when choosing your narrative voice, think 1, what would be the best way to receive the story as a reader? 2, where your strengths lie in writing. If you're really good at writing action but not so much at writing emotional stuff, I would highly recommend choosing a narrative voice that's going to make it easier for writing that emotional stuff. And vice versa, if you're great at writing emotions, but sometimes the more physical things or the action scenes can be a little bit more difficult, then I would really recommend using third person, because it makes the bits that you struggle with a little bit easier to write. And then think about your reader, and what is your reader going to expect? As I always say, when stuck, think about your reader, and that will answer 99% of your questions. And if you're still stuck, start writing and change your mind halfway through. What's the worst that can happen? You have to go through and edit your book. You're gonna have to do that anyway, hate to break it to you. So yeah, that's my advice when picking a narrator for your story. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video this week. If you have, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel, which I'm sure the little button is down there somewhere. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you agree, disagree, please let me know. Talk to me in the comment section. I love talking about books, about the formation of books, about storytelling. It is one of my favourite things in the world, so please let's get chatting. And I'll see you guys next week. Can't remember what I'm talking about right now, but it'll definitely be book related and storytelling related. So I will see you guys soon. Bye!